Hello everyone, and welcome to Archaeopress. Today is going to be the first Germanic paganism related video I've recorded in a while. The subject of today's video is very near and dear to my heart because it is about the deity I venerate the most, Thor. Specifically, we are going to take a look at the stories revolving around Thor's slaying or possible slaying of the dragon Jormungandr, as well as other similar myths around the globe. And the purpose of this video is to examine the archaeological and textual evidence to determine as closely as possible how old this myth may be in the wider context of Norse mythology and Germanic mythology overall. So, right off the bat, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you who are watching this video, are familiar with who Thor is, probably thanks to Marvel Comics or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, while the Thor in Marvel Comics and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a blonde-headed, clean-shaven figure most of the time, Thor in Norse mythology generally looks like you see on the screen here, a red-bearded figure who is muscle-bound and goes on journeys to slay monsters and evil gods and dragons and what have you. And the most prolific and most well-known of his myths outside of the Marvel Comics and Marvel Cinematic Universe is his battle with the dragon Jormungandr. In fact, it is a myth that has three different examples within the two most well-known manuscripts of Norse mythology, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. And in these Eddas, the three primary stories that revolve around Thor's battles with Jormungandr are in this order, or at least thought to have been written in this order. Thor's journey to the kingdom of Utgard, a kingdom ruled by Jotuns or giants, wherein he is given the challenge to lift the paw or to lift a cat overall off the ground. However, he is only able to lift the cat's single paw, as you see here. And after this challenge, and after he leaves this magical kingdom, it is revealed to him that was actually what is called the Midgard serpent, Midgard's owner, or Jormungandr, a very powerful dragon that wraps and constricts itself around the world. And the reason that he was only able to lift a single paw off of the ground is because of how large Jormungandr is. And so because of this, at least according to the Prose Edda that this myth comes from, Thor was insulted by the fact that he could not lift this dragon off the ground. So in a later story described in both the Prose and Poetic Edda, Thor would go on a fishing trip to an attempt to literally fish Jormungandr, the world serpent, out of the ocean with a ox head that you can see here, in an attempt to kill the world serpent. Now, there's a few different versions of this particular myth right here, and we'll get into the earliest ones in a minute. But in the one described by Snorri, he does not succeed. Thor does not succeed in slaying Jormungandr. In fact, in the process of trying to pull Jormungandr from the sea, his foot kicks through the boat, and eventually various other scenarios that we'll talk about just in a little bit, because they are talked about in the earliest mentions of the text, happen to cause the fishing line that Thor is using to fish Jormungandr to be cut. And then the final myth revolving around Thor's battles with Jormungandr involves the myth of Ragnarok, the essentially a an Armageddon style final battle where the various enemies of the gods invade Asgard, and the gods battle various different opponents, each resulting in mutual deaths. And it's very much the same in this myth for Thor, where Jormungandr and Thor battle each other, resulting in Thor killing Jormungandr, but Thor is only able to take 9 steps before succumbing to Jormungandr's poison. However, there have been recent thoughts, understandable thoughts that I've had before myself, that because Ragnarok is probably a Christian invention based off of Armageddon, that perhaps this battle between Jormungandr and Thor itself was a Christian invention. And again, that's a very understandable thought process. I've had that thought process before. And it's a very common thought process throughout mainly Norse paganism, but also various other branches of Germanic paganism, including some Anglo-Saxon and Frankish pagans as well. However, while that is certainly possible that happened, what does the archaeological and textual evidence say about this battle? Like, was it a Christian invention, or does it predate the Christian conversion? Well, to look at that, first we must go back to the earliest textual or possible textual descriptions of this battle. So the first one that we're going to take a look at is a skaldic poem called Thorsdrapa, which was written circa 900 CE, give or take. It's a little difficult to tell exactly when it was written, as well as many of the things that I'll mention in this video, but roughly around 900 CE. And in that text, it's specifically, and you can take your time to read this, I'm not going to read all of it word for word, but in it, it describes essentially just Thor going out to fish for Jormungandr, and then it ends with Thor's fist slamming against the side of the boat as he is trying to pull Jormungandr out of the sea. So rather bare bones in terms of the content or the detail of the battle between Thor and Jormungandr. However, this does predate the Poetic and Prose Edda by quite a bit. The Poetic and Prose Edda being written around the 1300s CE. So right around 400 years, give or take, apart. So that's one, and this predates conversion, or at least to a point predates conversion. And then we have another poem, skaldic poem, written around the same time, that is actually the version of the poem that Snorri in his Prose Edda quotes. And again, in it, it's dates from around circa 900 CE, and again in it, it talks about essentially the fishing trip up until he digs his heels into the boat and his foot breaking through the boat and his fist slamming against the gunwale. However, it goes on to say that while Thor's line was cut by his fishing partner, the giant or Jotun Hymir, Thor was able to throw Mjolnir, his hammer or his axe, depending on the text you look at, and kill Jormungandr. Though Snorri adds this right here with the semicolon, the sentence after semicolon, Snorri adds that the Midgard serpent survived. But Snorri also admits that he added that line, that the original poem simply describes Thor killing Jormungandr. And then Thor, mad at Hymir for cutting his line, kicks him off the boat, which is unrelated, but that's essentially how the story ends. Okay, so with this, it's interesting because this poem, already most scholars have dated this poem to be written around 900 CE, but it does have some later additions by Snorri after conversion. So, in all probability, and even by Snorri's own admission, the Midgard serpent surviving was an addition that he added in. So, there is that possibility that Jormungandr survived, but either way, it's irrelevant to the fact that Ragnarsdrapa actually predates the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda by, again, around 400 years, give or take, and may very well have been just a tale of Thor slaying a dragon. And in fact, we can see this tale in runestones from around the 900 CE. And what is most telling about these runestones is all the runestones seem to only show that fishing trip between Thor and that fishing trip that Thor took to slay Jormungandr. In fact, you can see him kicking his foot through the boat right about here. No runestone depictions of, say, Ragnarok, no runestone depictions of Jormungandr surviving, just these runestones of Thor going fishing to kill Jormungandr. So that in itself, to me, suggests that one, again, this myth clearly predates conversion, and two, the original myth may have simply, again, been just a Thor goes out and slays a dragon, not some epic climactic battle that happens at the end of the world. Another very interesting possible description of Thor's battle with Jormungandr, and I put emphasis on possible, comes from the Anglo-Saxon poem written again around the 900s CE called Solomon and Saturn. And in this text, and you can pause to read, it talks about how thunder slays or defeats Satan with a fiery axe. Now you might be asking, dang, okay, so it mentions Thor or thunder defeating Satan. So what? What does this possibly have to do with Jormungandr and Thor's battle with Jormungandr? Well, now this is, I will admit that this is making some assumptions and some leaps. However, when one takes into account that the devil, Satan, Samael, the various angels or demons that are associated with Satan are often were often associated and are still associated during medieval times and modern times with serpents and dragons. In fact, the Romanian names Dracul and Dracula mean the dragon or the devil or the son of the dragon or the son of the devil, respectively. So while it's difficult to ascertain if this is what this is, it's not a huge leap to assume that this text, Solomon and Saturn, took the original pre-Christian myth of Thor slaying the dragon Jormungandr and superimposed Satan, the devil, Samael, Sathiel, as you can see in this text, what have you, on top of it, as a way to make conversion a lot easier for Germanic pagans, which is a technique that Christian missionaries used a lot for various different pagan communities. Now, there is another piece of evidence that suggests to the antiquity of the battle between Thor and Jormungandr, and it's actually a piece of evidence that also has some connotations for another very similar battle between Tyr, who was probably the original high god of the Germanic pantheon, and the giant wolf demon monster Fenrir. And you might be asking, well, how? How are these two connected? I mean, for one thing, they're connected by the fact that, according to the Poetic and Prose Edda, Fenrir and Jormungandr are brothers. But other than that, how are they connected? Well, it all goes back to this migration era runestone. Actually, there's a couple of runestones, but these migration era runestones showing a millipede dragon monster where a figure is battling the monster with their hand inside its mouth right here. And here is another picture from a different runestone showing the same battle. Now, it should be clear that it's not 100% what this scene is depicting. Some people, by the way, these runestones are from Hangvars Parish in Gotland, Sweden. But it's been suggested by some scholars that they are possibly depicting battles, the battles of Sigurd and Beowulf against their dragons. However, many scholars also, such as Howard Williams, Dr. Howard Williams, whom I've had on my channel before, seem to disagree a little bit for a variety of reasons. My qualms with this, for example, are the fact that there is a battle axe or a hammer or a mace, what have you, inside the figure's hand, while Beowulf and Sigurd were famously known for using swords, or in Beowulf's case, swords and wrestling. Now, to be fair, taken into consideration the wrestling part, this scene sort of does look like a wrestling scene. However, this scene doesn't, and furthermore, the poem of Beowulf very clearly states that Beowulf, when he fought his dragon in that story, fought it with a sword. The only time he wrestled was with Grendel. Furthermore, as I said, you can see the hand going inside the creature's mouth. So what this suggests to some scholars, such as Howard Williams, is that this millipede sea serpent monster thing may be an early depiction of both the Jormungandr and the Fenris myth, especially, say, considering the battle with a figure wielding an axe or a mace battling the sea monster, along with the figure having their hand in the mouth, which is very similar to the story of Tyr and Fenris, where Tyr had his hand bit off by Fenris as he was restraining the wolf with the magic unbreakable chains. Again, not 100% clear if this is the case, but it does suggest quite a lot that these myths of these battles between these monsters and the gods, such as Fenris and Jormungandr, predate Christian conversion by quite a lot. In this case, this is migration period, and so therefore it would predate it by about 800-ish years, give or take. However, this is not the only evidence that suggests a pre-medieval or an early medieval creation or antiquity of the battle between Thor and Jormungandr. We can actually postulate even further the age of this battle by looking at the Germanic tribes during the Roman Empire. Specifically, by looking at Hercules Magacenus, who was a deity that was syncretized between the Germanic tribes and Romans. The Germanic tribes syncretized Hercules Magacenus with Thor, and the Romans did vice versa. And it led to the rise of the Hercules Magacenus cult that you see here. And this syncretization and this connection between Thor and Hercules actually goes back to around 98 CE in the text Germania, written by Tacitus. And in it, he describes the various deities who were worshipped by the Germanic tribes in Germania. And he gives them Roman names, such as Mercury, Hercules, Mars, and then the deity Isis, who scholars are still to this day not quite sure who that could be. However, most scholars agree that the Germanic tribes probably weren't worshiping the Roman and Greek deities of Mercury slash Hermes, or Hercules slash Heracles, or Mars slash Ares. That these were probably Germanic deities that Tacitus, a Roman, put Roman names on top of, with the belief that Mercury is Odin or Woden, Mars is Tyr or Tu, and Hercules is Thor or Thunar. And Tacitus continues this description of the veneration of Hercules by talking about how Hercules was the greatest hero in their mythology and in their culture, and that they sing hymns about him when they go into battle, and they do they do things to inspire bravery. They do initiation rites, etc., etc. Essentially, he is who they look up to, and he is their primary hero and war god. And so, taking into account that the Tacitus' mention of Hercules is probably referring to Thor or Thunar, one of the earliest mentions of Thor that we have, we can now compare the myths that they had, because clearly they saw, both the Romans and the Germanic tribes saw the similarities between Hercules and Thor. So with that in mind, we have to ask, well, so what? How does that explain, the antiquity of the battle between Thor and Jormungandr? Well, it explains quite a lot, because Hercules was famous for, alongside his companion Aeolus, slaying the nine-headed Linnarian Hydra, a dragon serpent creature from both Roman and Greek mythology, as well as the slaying of the dragon serpent guardian of the Apples of Discord, Ladon, as well as the guardian of the Golden Fleece, that you can see here in this clay figurine. So with that in mind, we can infer that the myth of Thor slaying Jormungandr goes back to at least the Roman era, around 1,000 years before the conversion of the Germanic and Scandinavian tribes in Northern Europe. But we can't actually stop there. We have to look at more evidence. And some of the best evidence for the antiquity of this dragon slaying myth actually goes back to the Indo-European expansions or migrations. So the Indo-Europeans, the Omnia specifically, began to expand outside of Central Asia, the western part of Central Asia, the Pontic-Caspian steppe, around 5,000 years ago, with the Proto-Hittite, Anatolian, and other Proto-Anatolian cultures going south at around 5,000 years ago, 3000 BCE, and then as well as the Afanasyevo cultures going east around 3000 BCE, 5,000 years ago, and the ancestors of the Germanic, Celtic, and Slavic peoples going into Europe around 2700 BCE, so around 4,700 years ago. And here's sort of a map of the Indo-European languages for reference. Again, you see Germanic, Albanian, Greek, etc., etc., Celtic, Italic, yada, yada, yada. And with this knowledge of the Indo-European expansions in mind, as well as the connection of these language families, we can now understand the common ancestors that these various religions had within the Indo-European sphere. Now, this does not mean that they had one single religion. They probably had several different regional or tribal religions in on themselves, but there was probably some common ancestor to all these religions. And so, with that in mind, we can take a look at other Pro-Indo-European religions and see what they have in regards to serpent dragon slaying myths. Well, there's quite a lot. First, there is Zeus's battle with Typhon, uh, the father of all monsters, and a fearsome dragon that he is first described. He's first described battling in Hesiod's Theogony, circa 900 BCE. We also have, even older than that, the battle between the Proto-Hittite and Proto-Anatolian deity Tarhuntz and the dragon serpent Ilyonka, with their tales written around circa 2000 BCE, around 1100 years earlier than Zeus's battle with Typhon. We also have the battle between Indra and Virtra, the dragon Virtra, as described in the Rig Veda, written roughly around 1500 BCE. We also have the very interesting tale of Neja, a Taoist deity in China's battle with the dragon Ao Bing. Now, it should be clear that Neja is a rather latecomer to Chinese literature, first showing up in Ming Dynasty texts such as Journey to the West. However, his battle with Ao Bing has some earlier, it's thought to have some earlier influences from Buddhist and Hindu texts written around the 900s CE, as seen in this picture here. In this mural here from the oasis of Dong Wang in Central Asia, with the baby at the top right thought to be most likely Neja, or the predecessor to Neja, Nana, who himself had a predecessor in Krishna, the Hindu deity or Hindu demigod. So suggesting that while Neja himself is a late introduction, the story of a boy deity battling a dragon is very much of Indo-European origin. But it doesn't stop there. While Indo-European stories are the ones that most commonly looked at for these thunder deity battling the water dragon, tales. These tales are actually far more widespread than one might think. Now, I want to preface this, and I will preface this and bring this up again later in the video multiple times. These stories that I'm about to bring up across the world are in no way derived from Indo-European religions. They were from cultures who either had no contact with Indo-European religions or had very little contact with Indo-European religions, and many of these stories actually predate the Indo-European expansions by at least 1,000 or more years. So again, or they're on completely different continents that would not have been connected to the Indo-European expansions. These stories that I'm about to bring up are just stories that are so similar that they suggest a more common human narrative, i.e., a narrative where humans think of similar stories because all humans are very similar in the way they think. So the first one of these very similar stories worldwide we're going to take a look at is the story of Baal-Hadad, a Semitic and Mesopotamian deity's battle with the water serpent, very similar to a Hydra deity dragon, Lotan. With the earliest stories of their battle being written around the 18th century to the 16th century BCE. So right along the same timeline as the Indo-European expansions, but the Indo-Europeans did not make it as far south as the Levant, modern-day Israel and Jordan, They did make it into Anatolia, but not as far south as the Levant. But this is still a very similar story of a thunder deity battling and slaying a water serpent dragon. And then also sort of on the same timeline as the Indo-European expansions, but still too far out of the reach of Indo-European expansion, is the Sumerian and Akkadian tale of the thunder deity Marduk's battle with the water dragon Tiamat, whom he slays and sort of creates the world with. And then going to Egypt, we have a tale that predates the Indo-European expansions by at least 1,000 years, and that is the battle between the sun deity Ra and the water serpent dragon Apep, being written roughly around, at least as far as we can tell, the earliest roughly around 4000 BCE. And then we have another Chinese tale predating the tale of Neja by about 1,000 years, by about 1,500 years, and that is the tale of the fire deity Zhurong battling the water dragon Gonggong in response to Gonggong's flooding of the entire world. Now, it should be clear that in this tale, Zhurong himself rides dragons while battling Gonggong, and which makes sense because most East Asian dragons are benevolent and not malevolent, like, say, Jormungandr or any other European dragons, or Typhon. But this is still an example of a fire deity, sky deity, battling a water dragon and defeating them. And this tale was written roughly around 400 BCE. Then we go across the Pacific or Atlantic Ocean, depending on which direction you go to, and we look at the Thunderbirds and Thunder People and their battle with the Horned Serpents, with the earliest distinguishable. And I want to emphasize that because these tales could predate this timeline, and probably do, but the oldest distinguishable tales of these battles being around circa 1000 BCE. So the horned serpents in Native American religious practice were essentially the rulers of the underworld, these giant monsters that ruled the dark underworld that isn't always bad. I mean, that's where a lot of people go when they die, and it can be a pleasant place, but it can also be a dark and dangerous place. And that's where the horned serpents come in. And we can see some fairly early depictions of these horned serpents in Native American theology, again, going back to about 1000 BCE, but also in examples such as this Hopewellian ceramic sculpture that you see here. And you can see it's got horns and sort of a serpentine face, but a monstrous sort of jaguar, panther-like body. Sometimes they were called water panthers, as well as a rattlesnake tail. Here's a sort of a sideways view of this horned serpent underwater panther. And the tales of these horned serpents are endemic across, are found across all of North America, ranging from, as I said, the Hopewellian sculpture we just saw, to the Mississippian period, where they are found depicted on gorgets, either sometimes made of shell, sometimes made of slate, like this one, and sometimes made of copper. And they can also be found on pottery. Again, here's an example of a horned serpent flying across the sky. Again, they were very similar to dragons. And as I said, they are found pretty much continent-wide, with some cultures having them as underwater panthers, such as the Haudenosaunee or the Ojibwa, the Natchez, others having them as a little bit of both, such as the Dakota, the Mandan, the Hidatsa, and then other tribal nations such as the Cherokee, the Caddo, and the Mi'kmaq, having them simply as horned serpents. But despite this overlap and this separation of whether or not they are horned serpents or underwater panthers, the thing that is seen across the board in all tales is the battle between these horned serpents and the thunder beings, whether they be thunder people or thunderbirds, in all indigenous North American theology. In fact, you can see it in this rock art here. I know it's a little hard to see, but here is the Thunderbird battling the horned serpent. The battle between the horned serpent and the thunder people can also be seen in the hero twin myth, which is also seen across the entire North American continent, with especially in the southeast and the eastern woodlands, the the hero twins being connected to the thunder deities in some regard, specifically in the southeast. And in fact, this is I believe this is a Caddo gorget showing the hero twins. And as I said, the hero twins were connected to the thunder beings in various different ways. And they can be seen specifically in Cherokee and Muskogee Creek and Choctaw and Caddo, etc. Religious theology as being the sons of the thunder deity or the thunder man seen here. In fact, the thunder man, also known as the red man, is depicted in several tales from ranging from Cherokee tales to Muskogee Creek tales to Seminole tales, is described to be the sworn enemy of the Uktana, or Unsiliga, various other different versions of the same name, for the horned serpent that you see here. And they would often slay them in sort of a dragon slayer type fashion. In fact, very similar to European stories, often in these Native American stories, human warriors themselves would also go and battle these horned serpents, these in a sort of a dragon slayer type way as well. Now, again, this does not mean that all of these stories were derived from Indo-European mythology, or that they had influence from Indo-European mythology. In fact, none of these stories did. They were all either too far out of the sphere of influence of the Indo-European peoples and religions, such as the Native American peoples on North America, or the peoples living in the Levant and Mesopotamia, or the stories predated them by between 1,000 to 2,000 years. But okay, so now that we've gone through all of that, you might be asking, well, Dane, what does all this mean? You've gone through quite a lot of information, but you haven't explained what it might mean. Well, this is where the concluding remarks come in. So, what all of this evidence shows is that it suggests that the myth of Thor slaying Jormungandr is an ancient myth with textual and archaeological evidence present at least as early as the 900s CE. With as well as the fact that despite the presence of a mutual death of Thor and Jormungandr in the original Ragnarok myth written in the 1300s, the earliest references, both textual and archaeological, suggest a simpler tale of Thor not only surviving the battle, but also permanently slaying Jormungandr. With this hypothesis backed up by similar myths in the greater Indo-European religious family, where deities, thunder deities such as Zeus and Indra, themselves were always the slayer of a water serpent or dragon, along with the synchronization between Thor and Hercules, the latter of whom also slew several dragons or serpents. Also, earlier depictions of Jormungandr may be seen possibly in the picture stones from Hangbar's Parish, specifically the one of the figure wielding the axe, that supports the view that Jormungandr was always a malevolent sea monster, and may suggest an earlier fusion of Fenrir and Jormungandr, i.e., they were probably originally a singular being and only split into two distinct entities later on, possibly in the migration period, later migration period, because this itself was from the migration period, after some renegotiation with the mythology. While it is also possible for the figure of Jormungandr to have been corrupted from a more benevolent form after conversion, as is possibly seen in Solomon and Saturn, where it is possibly showing the mythology of Satan's relationship with dragons and serpents being superimposed upon the battle between Thor and Jormungandr. Most of the archaeological and textual evidence before conversion actually disputes this hypothesis. Also, the hypothesis of Thor slaying a malevolent serpent dragon is further supported by the global presence of similar tales around the world, such as Ra's battles with Apep, Zhurong's battles with Gonggong, Meijia's battles with Ao Guang and Ao Bing, Ao Guang's son, and the battles between the various thunder beings and thunderbirds and the horned serpents of Native American religions. And again, while it is important to note that the above religions are in no way related to or derived from or had influence from the Indo-European religions, with the possible exception of Neja's battle being derived from Indian and Buddhist religious beliefs, the existence of these tales suggests a common human belief in thunder deities slaying malevolent serpent dragons, a global belief that is common to most human cultures, with the exception of most of, not all, but most of the East Asian dragons, as the East Asian dragons themselves were seen as thunder deities. But they are the exceptions to the rule. Therefore, when looking at all of the presented evidence, Thor's slaying of Jormungandr can be seen as an ancient tale of good versus evil and order versus chaos, rather than a creation of post-Christian demonization. And again, I'm not making this video to demonize or to attack anybody who has chosen to venerate or has chosen to take this view. You have your own praxis, you have your own beliefs, you can worship whoever you want. I'm just presenting the archaeological evidence as is shown. But as it is shown, it's simply showing that the Thor slew Jormungandr and Jormungandr was evil. But religions evolve, mythology evolves, so it's perfectly fine, in my opinion, for you to venerate these deities if you see fit. But here is what the archaeological evidence says. Okay, with that, that ends the video. I went through quite a lot of information pretty quickly. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see me cover any of the tales or the other archaeological evidence that I mentioned in the video in greater detail, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed the video, and remember to like, share, and subscribe, and you all have a good day.